But now I want to put it over to my panelists to really provide their perspectives. And so I'm going to start with Danny Braverman. And Danny is best known for his research entitled What? No Fish? And that was voted in The Guardian's top 10. And the solo show was based around Danny's family history. So amongst other things, Danny has been well known for that. So Danny, I invite you to provide your perspectives, please.
Thank you. Thanks, David, and it's really great to be invited here. And I'll now turn the mic on. I will now turn the mic on for someone who's supposedly experienced in performance. That was a schoolboy error to begin with. And it's great, Dave, and thanks for inviting me. What No Fish was, I'm not going to talk about it, and I've only got 7 minutes, but was a piece of performance before I knew it was research, actually, and then it kind of led to, and you can look it up on that internet thing and find out more about it. But yes, it enabled me to work as a storyteller around the world, and it's part of my interest in disability. Part of what it tells is the story of my cousin who was institutionalized autistic and who I never knew existed, and I discovered him through some family memorabilia. So that's one level for the show. What I want to talk about in relation to disability today, I want to use a framework that I borrowed from a man called Rob Hopkins, who some of you may have heard of. Hopkins is the pioneer of something called the Transition Network, which is a sustainability project that started in Totnes in Devon and is now global. It's all that stuff about alternative currencies and so on. And what I love about, particularly as a theatre maker, about Hopkins' work is that he emphasises the role of the imagination in creating change. And he has a 3-part sort of scheme that I'm going to follow in my remaining 5.5 minutes, which is he asks what is, then you employ so we look at what is, we then employ the imagination to go, what if? We look at the utopian futures, and then we get practical and we say, what next? So that's what I'm going to look at today with regard to kind of disability and our students and the HE sector. So with what is, let's look at this room. Just have a look around you and have a look at the room we're in. Somebody designed this room for learning. Yes? Some of you made this decision that you were going to go up those stairs and sit at the back. Some of you made the decision because the desks are there to flip up your laptops. This was designed, I'm guessing, before the ubiquity of plugging in what you make notes with. Yes, because they don't all have plugs by them. Yes, so you can't all recharge. How much do we think they considered the wheelchair user in this design? There's nothing on the walls. For us theatre people, this is an amphitheatre. The stage is there, we're down here. They could have chosen a proscenium arch, and we could have had a lovely Victorian frame for us, which would have changed the meaning. Very few lecture theatres are designed in the round or in traverse on 2 sides. Very little in promenade or immersive. But you know, one of my kind of heroes of theatre was a man called Augusto Boal. And Boal used to say, theatre can take place anywhere, even in theatres. And I think learning can take place anywhere, even in lecture theatres. So have a think about who is the normal student, Norm. Let's call them Norm, shall we? Norman, Norma. Who is it that this is supposed to benefit? And what that leads us to, and many of you will know if you've had any kind of access to disability rights, is that disability rights is fundamentally in opposition to the kind of traditional medical model of disability. The medical model says that disability is defined by something that's wrong with someone that needs curing. If you can't cure them, then give them some charity and pity them. That's essentially what the medical model says. Disability rights movement came up with the social model of disability that's defined by barriers. And we can see, can't we, that if you were a wheelchair user, the barrier here wouldn't be your impairment, it would be the stairs. Right? That's your barrier. It's a physical barrier, but there are also attitudinal barriers, aren't there? And there are communication barriers. And if you've got the weight of experience of being a disabled person, as I am in the world, then you've also got kind of psychological barriers as well. And this is what all our students face. So many of you will probably have things that address the barriers, right? Because we have an Equalities Act, and it says we must make reasonable adjustments, and at Goldsmiths we have something called a RASA, nothing like an acronym, is there? Reasonable Access Student Agreement. And that is a document that gives, supposedly, is the equivalent of a ramp or a lift or a sign language interpreter or a palimptypist, right? To give you access. So let's look at what that looks like in reality. So in my reality, here's an example. Let's make it a story that's an amalgam. Student comes, knocks on the door in distress and says to me, I've come about my flatmate. My flatmate can't get out of bed. In year 2, they've not turned up for a term and a half. They're not putting in assignments. They're depressed. They're anxious. I'm really worried about them. So I do the things you have to do, and I contact well-being and so on. But of course, this student isn't accessing their emails. They're ignoring it, right? Do we know this student? Do we know Norma? Should we call her Norma? Do we know her? Yes? Some of you don't. Some of you don't have students who ignore emails. Amazing. So I think I'll WhatsApp her, because I know that part of the thing that Norma is struggling with is digital distraction. So I'll distract her, and she gets in touch, and I say, so let's see what your RASA says. She says, what RASA? She's got through halfway through year 2 and doesn't have a reasonable access student agreement. Why not? She's dyslexic, she's got ADHD, she's experiencing anxiety, which she doesn't see as a disability, although by the social model, of course, it would be, right? It presents barriers to participation. So why hasn't she done that? So eventually we get it, and what do we get with the RASA? We get, and by the way, this is the what is still, what we get is a menu, don't we, of a typical person with this condition. Anyone had something similar where it says, don't put the student on the spot? Yes? Yes? Who have you put students on the spot anyway? Do you have to know that they're experiencing anxiety before you decide not to be sarcastic when they come through the door and go, oh, nice of you to come by Christmas, right? No, we don't. So some of those, and there'll be some extra time for exams and this, that, and the other adjustment. What I think this is it shows a culture of maybe a different kind of model that we have in universities, which I term a managerialist adjustment model. Yes? So this is bureaucracy that is set up in order to comply with the law, primarily. It's constrained because there's no budgets particularly attached to it. And ultimately, it doesn't think about the fact that poor old Norma was feeling so anxious and upset that she didn't actually, the barriers of all the form filling, getting a letter from a doctor, being diagnosed to access all this stuff. So she's disadvantaged, isn't she? So what if we used a human rights approach? So there's a school of architecture, a kind of philosophy of architecture around critical disability studies that looks at universal design. And what that means is we don't start by retrofitting what already exists. We start from a point of view of inclusion. And we know about this in theatre, actually, because there's a wonderful theatre company called Grey Eye, some of you may know, that's run and led by deaf and disabled people. And what Grey Eye will do is, yes, sometimes use a palimptypist, but they will integrate the captioning creatively into the show. The sign language interpreter won't be on the side of the stage, so that you can tell the deaf people in a sign interpretive performance because it looks like they're watching tennis at centre court. Looking to the sign interpreter, back of the action. It's not an inclusive experience, so they integrate the sign language interpreter into the performance. So what if we designed our curriculum in terms of universal design? Well, there'll be huge challenges, wouldn't they? Because we'd be challenging lots of orthodoxies. Think about maybe some of the barriers that students might face every day. The congested corridors could be, yes, timetabling. In Goldsmiths, you sort of need a geography degree just to work out from the signage to get to a room, yes, let alone if you're not neurotypical. So all those barriers that students face, all the reading that we give them prior to when they come to a seminar, yes, all those things are barriers that are orthodoxies that maybe need challenging, but they're going to be tough. So, yes, what if we base things on universal design, but that's sort of a bit cloud cuckoo land, isn't it? With the capacity we've got as lecturers. So what can we do now? And I would say you start with disability rights, and there's a very simple disability rights slogan, which is nothing about us without us. Involve disabled people in decision making, disabled students, disabled staff at every point of policy. Yes, properly involved, not cosmetic consultation, but proper involvement. Disability equality training, statutory for every member of staff and for students as well. And role models. We don't necessarily know the role models that are around. You know, at Goldsmiths, we talk about our glorious alumni, and at the moment we're making a big deal out of Steve McQueen, of course. Time up.
I was being discreet.
I know. So a modest heckle from my left. Steve McQueen is dyslexic and talks about it quite a lot, and actually was a wonderful role model for what I might call the affirmative model of disability, which is to say that actually your impairment is, I don't think he'd be the amazing world-class visual artist he is if he was neurotypical, right? So let's make sure our students know from the minute they come in the door that actually who they are, be affirmative about who they are, and that'll be the start.
Thank you so much, Danny.
You're welcome.